everyone, and welcome to Silver Threads, where we are still walking and still waking. I'm Carla Bergman.
And I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is the show where we trace our present path through the people and stories of the past, as we ourselves, long-term radicals, learn about each other, from each other, and continue to walk, continue to wake. This week, we're joined by Dezeray Lyn, a nurse and street medic, a mutual aid worker, and writer. Des has been a mutual aid worker with mutual aid disaster relief in numerous mobilizations over the past 4 years, working with and being led by storm-impacted communities. She's worked with the International Solidarity Movement in Palestine, answering the call from occupied Palestinians for human rights monitoring and intervention. She has also been a Tampa Food Not Bombs helper for nearly 7 years. She's also the writer of fiction that centers social justice, but with magical or humorous spins to it. Welcome to the show, Des.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you here.
Hi, Des. Thanks for being here. So we'll just get into it if you're ready. And
Sure.
we like to start off asking our guests to help us or just trace your story a little bit, your personal history of maybe a watershed moment or when things were ruptured and you decided to join a collective or a movement or get out on the streets.
Yeah. I had been involved since the early 2000s with animal rights, which was like happenstance that I became exposed to like animal abuse and violence against animals with factory farms and things and vivisection. And then that had been like a focus until Occupy happened. And when Occupy happened and I got involved, it was my first real like exposure to broad-based like organizing and social justice around like a lot of issues with capitalism and oppression and racism. And so when I got involved in that, it was just like it kind of I had been on such a focused path, and at that time, it kind of opened me up to a lot of different struggles that were happening, and yeah, and I became involved from there. So that's kind of how things got started for me.
I'm curious, how did you, because I think Occupy was one of those watershed movements for a lot of folks that I know. How did that shift from kind of like focusing on animal rights to like a larger systemic thing that then morphed into, disaster relief for you?
Well, I think that becoming like enlivened to struggle and oppression, it makes you like it makes it really visible for you in all places, because like suffering and struggling is something that is like linked, between, from non-human animals and like people like with and disasters, and it's all, to me, it's like intrinsically linked. And so when I became enlivened to like animal rights struggles and the environment, and then just learning more and becoming more involved and more like deeply involved in organizing within these movements, I started to see like a relationship. And even like just prior to Occupy, I started getting involved in like against anti-death penalty work and abolition struggles. And then when Occupy came along, it had like one thing that was kind of startling to me about how narrow my focus had been prior was that it seemed like just something that was happening in New York. And then in Philly, where I lived at the time, the Occupy encampment started, and it was like, wow, and then just the encampments were starting everywhere. And then from there, learning about like preceding it, like the Arab Spring and the different ways that we drew like inspiration and empowerment to, launch that kind of a resistance mobilization in our respective cities, So I think it just like, it just all becomes visible once you tap into, community and struggle, and you engage those struggles. I think it like, becomes something that's like alive in you. So you react to it where you see it and experience it,
Yeah, totally. When you're sort of reflecting back on this political path, is there a point when you look back and kind of, have a face palm or a shudder of something you believed in that has shifted with time as it does?
When I read that question, like a ton of like bloopers like popped in my mind. One thing that I thought was, pretty ridiculous was there was a direct action years and years ago without details, just like I had my license in my shoe and had escaped into a field afterwards and realized I no longer had my ID with me and had to go back to directly the spot where I was trying to leave from to find my ID laying there. And kind of at the time and ever since, I think of how absolutely ridiculous it would have been if I never realized that I had lost it and gone back. I would have gone down as like one of the most ridiculous actions in history, that could have been like really detrimental. But yeah, just things like that. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing those. We think it's part of what we're trying to get here is to show that we stumble and fall, all of us. No one has the recipe on how to get from or how to make the social change cake or something. I don't know.
Yeah. My thing that I oftentimes tell people is that I used to be like, when I was like 18, I was very adamant that if we just voted for the Democrats, then eventually everything would be okay. And so I look back at that and I'm like, oh God. So yeah, there's some humility in that space for sure. I'm also curious, like, speaking of connections, because that's kind of like part of the show too, is like these threads that connect not just us as radicals, but also like these disparate issues that you've talked about. How did Palestine, like in particular, become kind of a focal point for you?
Well, in July, like the summer of 2014, one of the like bombing campaigns that Israel has launched against people in Gaza was going on. I remember at the time, like, just like a complete disbelief that things could be going on so peacefully and calmly here, especially when we're so, our relationship with the Israeli government and like our support and funding essentially of the occupation was like that we could exist so peacefully and so obliviously to what was going on there. And I know it's not something that's like advertised everywhere that we're supporting this violence, but because of mobilizations around it, I had started to get involved and in my local community, just trying to raise awareness, and then I met someone here, a comrade, Betty Jo, who had been to Palestine numerous times. And when I met her at a gathering around this bombing campaign that was going on and watching every day, like the numbers of dead Palestinian folks like rising and rising, like all of those feelings and all of that information like coalesced. And when I met this person and we were organizing together, immediately our first conversation was around like her trips and her personal experiences in going there, and how this is something that Palestinian organizers had asked for, was humanitarians, like internationalist solidarity to come to Palestine to witness what was going on and to intervene and create awareness around what was happening. So when I spoke with her, probably less than a year later, I had, arranged to go. It all ties in with what the crimes and the violence that our country was founded on and continues to fund to this day. So I very much wanted, these struggles not to be kind of obscured by distance and geography and by, capitalism trying to create conditions where we were comfortable. And as long as we were comfortable, struggles elsewhere and chaos that we were creating elsewhere and contributing to elsewhere were like, in the background. So I just wanted to bring that to the forefront. And my exposure to someone who'd been there and who had created relationships and friendships and built bridges between that location and this one, it became a possibility for me. It became something that I really wanted to do everything I could, to help support and to help like it become a reality for other people who could do something about it.
In that space, like kind of with regards to, you talk about like that person who is able to build relationships and build bridges with that, but also with like the mutual aid work, something that, kind of like it's kind of like, it's become like the word woke, like solidarity. Everyone's like people sign their email solidarity when they're from like moveon.org, and you're like, the fuck? But like, I'm curious just like how you feel that manifests in particular in like very different spaces, but like the common themes there of solidarity, like whether that be in Palestine or Puerto Rico or, you know, Texas or what have you.
One of the main things that has been meaningful to me is like that when our relationship to disaster, like not just disaster being like Hurricane Delta that's coming through right now, but like the daily disaster that we go through of like poverty, systemic racism, like climate catastrophe, all these things that happen on the daily that we've become accustomed to, like all of this, everything we do centers around kindness and relationships that we built, and not and being able to collect experiences and internalize them and the growth that we have, and use that moving from large disaster to disaster, because reinventing the wheel every time a mass mobilization happens or something happens, it reduces the amount of time and the experience and the lessons that we have from, you know, lessons we've learned from past mobilizations and past situations that have happened. And if we carry those experiences with us from day to day, from mobilization to mobilization, and enrich those relationships, that's to me the most critical thing, because those relationships, they're, you know, that's at the end of the day, that's everything we have, is, you know, not like necessarily the demonstrations we've been at, or, you know, that we have been here or there, but we've been privileged to be in different spaces at different times, but that the people that we have met and the trust that we've built, because when everything gets fucked up and goes to hell, that is what we're going to have to lean on and to build with each other. And so to me, like, not reinventing the wheel every time, and like taking experiences and the things we learn, both good and bad, from them, and carrying them through our daily life, and then having them to act on immediately when something else terrible and broad-based happens. So we have those experiences, draw from those relationships that we've built, so we can really connect with other groups and other people, and, you know, and move from there.
I deeply agree with you that it's the relationships are where it all starts and continues to grow, and where it's going to end. So I love that. I don't want to completely jump right into your storytelling, fiction writing, but I can't help but make a connection right now, because, you know, here you are being a nurse and a medic on the front lines of ongoing disasters, but and thinking about connection. I'm curious what you like, what inspires you to write magical realism and fiction, and connecting that to the struggles, and how that connects back to relationship building or reaching people.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, like, it's important for me. I have a lot of whatever. I have like an anxiety disorder and like a panic disorder and things. And for me, it's really helpful to name things, like to name actions and to make sense of like horrific things that are happening to people. So when I'm not a person who's like, I get very emotional and very, like, it's hard for me to I don't know, the easiest way for me to communicate is through stories, and like having them be kind of magical and silly takes sharp edges away from things, and it's purely like an escape hatch. So it's healing, it's helpful in expressing your own anxiety and things that maybe you don't feel comfortable or safe sharing with people, to share it through characters, and to liken, you know, the things that are frightening and scary, and the things that, you know, break our hearts every day, that other people have to, you know, just it's to me, it's a way of naming things that are awful and being able to express things, you know, through like sometimes ridiculous situations, and then make magical things happen when sometimes I feel like that's, you know, not a possibility in our reality, you know.
Yep, I love it.
It's creating like fake magical weapons for real situations, you know, that we may never have our hands on.
I love that. Fake magical weapons. I'm going to write that down.
Same. I was asking because I'm fascinated with people who either they're organizers on the front line, or they're journalists, or they or they write in the nonfiction realm, how there's often, not everybody, but there's this connection that all of a sudden people will often move to fiction or creative nonfiction as a way to express themselves and maybe to have a better life in the day to day at points, is what you were saying. But I think there's also something about connection there to, and reaching folks who you cannot reach through nonfiction writing. You're just going to be banging your head against the wall constantly. But if you frame it within a story, like Orwell comes to mind as somebody who I totally, when you track his life, you're like, I can totally see why he moved to fiction. He was probably so fed up, right? Like just banging his head against the wall. Like, I'm gonna create some animals on a farm. Like, so I'm just like, I'm curious of when it, because you see that trajectory a lot, but I'm curious when it started for you, if you want to say more about the storytelling, or where it blossomed and when it came up about. Or if you have any advice for those of us who want to do that work more.
I think I was writing before I got, before I learned about, a lot of struggles and social justice issues. So I was writing beforehand, and also a way to just escape certain realities that I didn't want to think about. But I think, like, advice, I don't know. I have a really hard time lately with writing and expression, just because it's like digging a hole and just dirt just falling in on top of you, because it's just, so much is going on right now. But for me, it just, sometimes I think, just even if things go off the rails, just to keep pushing through, like writing, even if it's sometimes at work, if I'm writing like medical notes, I just start writing ridiculous things in the middle of it, because it helps to like remind myself that part of me exists, So I think maybe even sometimes when it just feels hopeless and you don't have the ability to string things together, just breaking through some of the hardest times with just even the smallest thought or the smallest little feeling of something that's, makes you feel alive and safe, in some way.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. I always have a little notebook with me, and it's amazing how many like one line little snippets there are in that book, because it's just like I'll be walking, or even sometimes I'll be biking and I'll think of something and I'll just stop, take out the notebook, write like one line, and then I'm like off again. So I definitely feel that. I'm also curious because like we've kind of gotten onto the subject of like how this can be like therapeutic, and like that a lot of times, like obviously these fights and these spaces can be very traumatic and stressful. I was wondering, like, if you could say something about like what scared you or made you feel unsure, like when you first started becoming radicalized, and like how those feelings have either shifted or possibly gone away, or evolved into something else.
Going back, and even to today, like, it is stress inducing when you enter a space, particularly right in the beginning, where you're moving into it, a struggle and trying to be a co-conspirator and an ally, and it could be intimidating to, like, are you saying the right things, are you doing the right things, others have this wealth of knowledge and experience, and are people going to be kind, are people going to be patient, is this a space where people, like, suspicion or mistrust, or there's all these like issues that you get through just because we're human, and like, we've all been kind of socialized in a toxic kind of society, so we can replicate things that feel unsafe in other spaces. So I think that, and just like the pure, like, and the intensity of how I was feeling, just learning about all these issues, and engaging with people that had been involved in the struggle, and people have been impacted, and like, I think just coupling intensity with unsurety, and just kind of first getting to know people and things like that can be really intimidating, and then just like dealing with like rage and frustration and feelings of helplessness and powerlessness, and just knowing how this machine can just continue to devour people, and how such a thing can be possible, how such hatred and such vitriol, and how much, how like violence and how all these things can occur on the daily, and we just have to coexist with it and just watch it devour people. And so I think just that, like, intimidation and fear and grief and things like that.
Just thinking about your location and sort of inviting our listeners in to bring them to where you are located, and connecting that to what your thoughts are on radicalism there in that location. And yeah, it's just some of the hard parts and maybe some of the more hopeful parts you could share with us about your location.
So welcome to Florida. We have seems to be like a microcosm of the country at large, because we have, like, what people have termed a mini Trump. The governor DeSantis here is a horrible person. He is Trump. And he has we're of course dealing with issues that other locations are dealing with, other communities are dealing with: racism, police violence and brutality, and murder of community members of color. The like just the one thing is, like, very recently we have this bill. I'm trying to think of the exact name of it. It's a bill that DeSantis has introduced. It's mostly like a dog whistle and trying to distract people away from his failure with COVID safety measures in our state. But he's introduced legislation to criminalize any municipality that defunds police. He has made it okay if you're gathering in the street, if you're in the street, it is decriminalized for people to hit you with their vehicles, and it's criminal for you to be in the street protesting. They waive bail for all people before court hearings if you're arrested during a protest that happens in the streets. So the socio-political atmosphere is like a pressure cooker here, it feels like. We have many spaces and communities around in Florida that have been ongoing protests for like 100 days or so at this moment. And there have been multiple, in my personal community, like, attempted vehicular homicides of protesters, extreme violence, and every single instance the person has been let go off the scene immediately and protesters have been arrested. So that's one thing predominantly that we're struggling with right now, aside from, like, the larger connected struggle of, like, dealing with the pandemic and trying to keep each other safe and trying to be in the streets and resist, and also be mindful of the pandemic and the context of that. But the same thing that makes it a struggle in a violent atmosphere right now is what makes it a loving and a kind space, is because people are still willing, in the face of all of that, to be out there. So these protests are still continuing. People have gotten guns pulled on them very recently, and it's a struggle, but people being still very, very plugged in to larger broad-based organizing against police violence and killings and systemic racism. It's just been carrying on here. So it's both a beautiful and a very stressful and hectic environment right now. But I'm sure I'm sure some folks in other places, lots of folks can connect with that, and those struggles happening in their
Yeah,
community.
definitely. It's kind of like we've all been hit by the same hurricane at once.
Yeah.
You're listening to Silver Threads, part of the Grounded Futures multimedia platform. For more information and to donate to our totally ad-free show, check out groundedfutures.com. You can reach out to us with thoughts and suggestions at silverthreadshow@protonmail.com. You can find out more about our host Eleanor via artkillingapathy.com and our host Carla via joyfulthreadsproductions.com. And now, back to the show. So, like, with that particularly, and this, I think this is an interesting question to ask people who live in places that have a different type of radicalism. Like we spoke with Scott Crow, who lives in Texas, and obviously there's a type of radicalism there that is not our type of radicalism. And so it, like, kind of, since we're word nerds, like, the question that, like, what does radicalism mean to you? What does that look like in Tampa?
So to me, radicalism, like, to me, that all is just love, and at the roots of our shared struggle and cooperation and participation between community members. And in Tampa, there's a lot going on. There's like food sharing, there's information sharing, there's resource sharing, and particularly with our community since the beginning of the pandemic, we had like a complete lack of communication and contingency options and resources up for people that had resource barriers when the pandemic began. So people who were, for instance, experiencing homelessness had like libraries shut down, which cut off their access to communications with each other and to bathrooms, and food shares that were indoors had all shut down. And, you know, while it's understandable people have to step back and safety measures have to be put in place, people still have to survive, and contingencies weren't named, weren't created, weren't made any kind of priority in the city. And so people really stepped in and filled the gap. So to me, cooperation and helping each other to survive the daily disaster of capitalism and people that have been made essentially like refugees of the capitalist system on our streets, and like people have lost jobs, people like, to me, the radicalism in Tampa recently, since the pandemic started specifically, has been just filling in resources in the failure of the state. And people have done a really amazing job of keeping up that kind of cooperation and participation in our community, and connecting with people on, you know, what they need and what they want, and, you know, centering like the most impacted folks and moving from there, you know, and trying to just unleash everything we can into the streets so that people have what they need to get through. And I think at the same time, like little actions like making care packages for folks that have been arrested, and being there with pizza, vegan pizza, and different like chai tea, like different things for people, you know, those little quiet things that happen on the daily are just like, that's radical to me, you know, that's radical, and that's love. And to me, that's what radicalism is just like love and kindness. And that doesn't mean that we're not angry or enraged, or we don't like you know, work to just completely obliterate fascism by any means necessary. It means that because we love, we are angry and we fight, you know. So that to me is like what radicalism in Tampa has been.
I love that you said radicalism is love. Just- I read years ago that you can't actually have grief without love. Like you have to have loved in order to feel grief, and that them being at an intersection together has just gotten me through the most challenging times in my life. So that speaks to a lot of what I've heard about you and your work doing mutual aid and cooperative. Just the fact that you bring up just some of the sweetness in life that's important, like the vegan pizza, and you know, it's just lovely. And so I wanted to just keep that thread going into COVID and this moment and your work, and maybe you could talk a bit about how things have shifted, what's happening for you under the pandemic. I mean, you've already mentioned a bit, but going more in specifics, perhaps.
When I think of like the pandemic and what's happened, it like, to me, it like has made things more explicit. Like it's not only made like what the state is capable of and what they will do when pressed, like it's made that explicit, but it's made our reactions to it explicit. And it's very much made the disparities between different populations, like Black, Indigenous, and people of color, like how they've been disproportionately impacted by COVID, and providing support and mutual aid for folks that are infected and trying to get supplies to them. So like, I think it's also in a strange way, like this for years now, actually since Trump got in office, I have had this feeling like he's never going to leave. And like, he's just going to go, he's a fascist, but I feel like he's just going to like act on that to like create a coup. And I feel like in some ways the pandemic has prepared us in a way for like rapid response and mobilization. That's why I think it's extra, like it's always critical, but it's like extra critical to me now, like the relationships and the actions and the things that we have done to deal with COVID in our communities, and all of the issues around it and all the ramifications of it. So for me, personally, I've been like, I'm a new nurse. Like, I just started in March, and very much was grateful that I was able to be a part of a medical response to it. And at the same time, I talked to a friend who was saying like, they have this language around like medical workers and things like this that's almost um like a martyrdom, like we're in a line to jump off a bridge when the time comes and it's supposed to be a medal. So I think that the way life has changed, I feel like it's all a preparation for what's immediately coming to us. And yeah, just personally and politically and everything, I just feel like it's all just a stage in the downfall, and how we respond from here is just so critical, and so keeping these relationships and these friendships and these bridges we've built, just like enrich them as much as we can, because very soon I feel like those are going to be one of the only things we have to fight what's happening,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was my friend was just visiting me, and she's an emergency room doctor, and I was telling Carla before we started that the most American thing I've heard today is when she told me that as an emergency room doctor who's been, I mean, she's been working for years, but she's been working through COVID as well, she doesn't have health insurance. And I was like, that's the most American thing I've heard today. Yeah, and like just like you mentioned, the fact that this is sort of I think a lot of people feel that way. And even new folks that, like in our mutual aid network, there are new folks coming in who kind of have this look on their face, like they're a bit like shell shocked, because like before the pandemic hit, like I think some people were in a place, and DC is the fastest gentrifying city in the country. So like there are a lot of people who are not intentionally gentrifying, but they are gentrifiers. And so they're coming in and they're like, oh my God, I had no idea this shit was that bad. And you're like, welcome, come in. Like, I'm so sorry that like, I understand like how fucking traumatic it is to like, you think that shit is under control to a certain extent, but then you realize that the entire thing is like built on a foundation that is rotten to the very core, and it's crumbling, and it is only standing in our minds, really. There's nothing keeping it, like there's no structural integrity to this like hellscape. And so like I think like that I'm framing this question in a really dark fucking Dante-esque way, and I'm not really trying to, but like but like with everything that's going on, like, but also with this feeling that more people are seeing it than perhaps would have had the sheen not been ripped off of the system. Like, do you have more hope for the future with regards to that? Or how are you feeling like looking ahead, like not just to the election, but beyond?
There are days where I feel it, where some things make me feel really hopeful, and there's days where I feel like the exact opposite. And perhaps that's, I wouldn't presume to know this, but perhaps that's how others might be feeling, that it's hard. Like there's a line from Rebecca Solnit book, Hope in the Dark, that's some like hope is is like an act of defiance, but defiance isn't like enough of a reason to hope. Like there are reasons, but I think that remaining hopeful could be holding on to our humanity, which is the very thing that like fascism and capitalism tries to strip away from us, because that's how it continues to survive. So I think that on the better days, like there's different things that make me feel hopeful, and mostly it's like these little acts of love and kindness that happen. They're not little by any means, but I mean like scale wise to like, being in the street, and when I saw the police station burned down in Minneapolis, that was hopeful. That was like a beautiful feeling, and it like when these brutal towers of death are like shaken and and come down, it's like never does it feel so possible than in those moments that like we can seize on this and we can push, and everybody can push together, and we can move through it. And and then other times just like the shit keeps happening. Like the way that fascists and like authoritarians and people like Pence like plagiarize, and even these like anti-masker people with the "my body, my choice" things, the way that they abuse and are so hateful and cause so much struggle and chaos in people's lives, but then they go and they plagiarize and co-opt the language and the emotions and the feelings and the things that people in struggle share with each other. Like, it's just like talking about unity and shit like that, and solidarity is, no one in those positions should be able to say that without being immediately shut down. So those things make me feel really frustrated and hopeless, but other things don't.
Mm-hmm. This has been such a great conversation. It was exactly what I needed.
Oh.
Thank you. I've been asking a lot of my friends. I'm like, let's talk about end times, and they immediately get kind of mad at me or go, I don't want to do doomer conversation. I'm like, why does it have to be doomer? I'm talking about the fall of empire. Like, let's talk about it. Let's seize the moment. And I think, you just brought in all the interesting nuance and a quick little answer. So
Thanks.
I just feel better.
Oh, good.
I I think that just connects to thinking about what got us to where we're at in our thinking. And one of the questions we ask everybody is if there's a book or a thinker or a movement or a collective or something that hasn't been really inspired you along the way or that you return to.
Yeah, lots, but but one, Expect Resistance, that book from Crime Think, that like I have like, there's a whole nostalgia for me around reading it, because it was very like, it impacted me very strongly with like talking about like relationship to disaster, for instance, or relationship to failure, relationship to each other, to relationships to like, and every a lot of different dynamics were explored, and I thought it really like again, like it named things for me that I maybe wasn't able to articulate myself. I think good books do that, and good, and like people that inspire us, like that's what happens, you grow from it and change. And then this might be convenient, but Joyful Militancy was like I'm sorry, that was like incredible, and it's like a lot of what I go back to when I do feel very like, sometimes like how we can destroy each other and ourselves in the process of trying to create a good world for each other and a beautiful existence where we feel empowered and we feel loved and we feel safe, in when you lack the ability to like create and to build, like, and lack power, like destruction can become a form of creation for you, so we can like tear each other down, or be non-inclusive, or be, just this, the rigid radicalism that is discussed in the book, and so the biggest thing of like checking in and not replicating toxic systems for each other and toxic situations for each other, and just like remembering to love and to center community, and let that lead us, like that was really meaningful for me. And then there's a variety of other people and books that, look magical, and just things that I carry with me, like all people that just make me feel supported and feel like affirmed.
Oh, shucks. It's lovely.
Thank you.
Yay, Carla. That was good. That would be one of my answers too. I told my friends when I read it, I was like, it's like the self-help book for radicals. If there were one, like that's what that would be.
I just say that about 3/4 through writing the book, I said, "Fuck it, I'm writing a self-help book. I can't stand. I'm fucking over it." And it was super a joke. And then you said you wrote that, you put that out in the world, and I was like, "Did it? Yes."
I am part of that world now. Totally. Yeah, no, I love that. Like, I think what's so powerful is that, and I know like people will mention Shay in kind of cliche ways, but that's one of the quotes that like I come back to a lot, was like his quote about that everything a revolutionary does comes from a place of love. And that is like you said, like you can't have radicalism without love, and you can't, like Carla said, you can't have grief without love. It's like that all of these, the fight and the build, come from this place of deep love, and that's like a really driving force behind all of this. And so like I know that this is also part of like the inspiration conversation, but is there a certain radical or like a certain organizer that has also like helped you along the way? Because one of the things that we're doing with this show is to be the antithesis of like rigid radicalism, and to like let folks know that, hey, all like these folks that have been doing this shit for a while are still fucking up and learning, and still like humble in the face of like new knowledge and want to learn more. Like, so is there like a like somebody that has helped you grow and helped you on this journey?
Yeah, there's a variety of different people, and it could range from like one conversation to like a framework of like years long of knowing someone. Like there's someone in our community, Miss Deanna Joseph, and she came here from Katrina. Like she had been, trying to get somewhere safe from the hurricane. She came to Tampa, and she's lived in our community. And her son, so she's a Black woman. Her son was killed by police in Tampa, like strip searched and left on the side of a highway where he was hit by a car, and they let the driver go. And and she's so present in our community. She's so active in our community. She makes our community better in so many different ways. And I don't have daily contact with her, but she's always not only like celebrating the life of Andrew, her son, but she's celebrating community, and always just projecting love outward and support, and just, and that way of being, that way of existing, just feels so good to me. And so she gives off just such a loving aura, and so she's been a big inspiration to me. Jimmy Dunson, like from Mutual Aid Disaster Relief, he's been someone I've learned like a lot from, through just like patience and kindness and just being there for people, and how like little thoughtful acts can just mean like the world, and can end up making a lifetime of growth with someone, so like different folks. And then there could be someone I see on a video, someone I see in an interview or a podcast or something, that just like means a lot to me. And just like I have this little thing, this box where I like write down little, like if I hear a quote or a word or something, it could be anywhere that I hear that's just meaningful, and I save those, because when it's like different little bits like hit you in different ways on different days and mean a lot when you go back to them and revisit them. So yeah, just a million people, but those examples are, yeah, two. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I guess like one of the last questions here is, because what you were saying is that you're constantly pulling inspiration, which to me speaks to the fact that you're always looking for it. You're always looking for people to show you something you haven't seen before, or to see like something from a different angle. So one of the questions that we've also been asking folks is, do you feel like there's still a lot to learn?
Oh yeah. Like to me, like when you just said that of like pulling inspiration from everywhere, like in my mind I imagine us like we're creating the ground that we move on, So like it's a lot of work to create that ground to move forward, but you need to pull from everywhere. You need like constantly new tools, new materials, both like internally and externally, just like materials and supplies, to just like keep that going and keep moving forward. Another thing is like being a street medic. I got my first training in 2016, and one thing that I understand from street medic trainings, and that I try to share with others through trainings, is like one concept of a medic is just like always seeking new opportunities to learn, because our protocols change. Best practices don't start from day one, they develop through experience. And I think it's like a metaphor for everything. But I'm particularly now in a place where I want to quiet my mind and just intake you know, and take like lessons and experiences and different things that I can pull from people that are willing to share them, you know. So I think there's always in any situation in life, from any profession, from any job, from any life experience, from any relationship, there's always so much that you have to constantly be curious and seeking, and that's a good thing. Those are good qualities, you know, to have. They don't make you naive, and they don't make you, you know, unknowledgeable or unwise. That's wisdom, is trying to always learn and use experiences of people to constantly make yourself better, more accessible, more available, and more loving and kind to people.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Sort of keeping with that, and I think this is one of our last questions, a kind of celebration of mentorship, or mentorship in motion, this idea that mentorship goes in all directions. And I think it's really important to amplify as much as we can people who are just starting out and just emerging on the scenes, that just bring, some people, you know, they just are brand new to it, but they bring so much. And I'm just curious if there's anybody in your orbit, or even from around the world, who's kind of a newer voice, a younger, even a collective, that you'd like to share with our guests or with our audience.
Yeah, there's somebody that right away I thought of when y'all asked. There's a person that just started with Food Not Bombs, our local chapter, and her name is Belle, and she's just like makes me happy when I'm around her, because she's so happy and loving. And even if she was sad, she's just like so welcoming and so loving. And you would think when she, like, you know, enters a kitchen, that you're walking into her living room and she's like, welcome, come in, you know, like she's just so sweet and just disarming, you know. So I think that, you know, I'm sure that those qualities are shared by many people. So for those people everywhere, you're loved and appreciated very much. And, you know, her just countenance just makes me very happy, you know.
Yeah, no, that is, I so greatly appreciate that, because I am not that. I am like the brooding, like Nordic person in the corner. But yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And particularly for people just coming in, like, I think that's a really powerful, a powerful quality, because if they're close to that rupture of trust in the system, then it speaks even more volumes to me that they are able to have like this disposition that is like warming and hopeful, and yeah, I'm in awe of those folks for sure. So this has been so rad, and I could think of like a billion other things to say or to ask you, but is there anything that like you wanted to add that you felt like that we didn't particularly touch on?
Not really. No, I appreciate the conversation. It's really cathartic. I think, you know, coming up with all the shit going on and with Trump and everything, I think that just celebrating each other and just trying to focus direct pressure on the issues like at hand and the struggles at hand, and through that just supporting and celebrating each other is important. But in conversations like this that are cathartic, that just are vulnerable, and just sharing our hearts with each other, you know, is really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I so appreciate that you wanted, or that you were able to come into this space and be a little vulnerable and share your path with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Incredible. Exactly what I needed.
Silver Threads is recorded in different places across borders. Carla is located in Canada on Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh lands. Eleanor is located here and there, usually either in Sweden or on Piscataway land, now known as Washington, D.C. And our guests join us from around the world. You can find out more about the show and our guests at groundedfutures.com. To learn more about Eleanor's work, visit artkillingapathy.com and follow her on Twitter and Instagram at activisteleanor. For Carla, follow her on Twitter and Instagram at joyfulcarla. You can also reach out to us at silverthreadsshow@protonmail.com. And lastly, if you want to support the making of the show, you can donate over at groundedfutures.com. Thank you to the Grounded Futures team for supporting us with promotion. All of the snazzy graphics that you see are created by Jamie Lee Gonzalez. Grounded Futures is a multimedia platform and is produced by Carla Bergman, Jamie Lee Gonzalez, and Melissa Roach. Post-production audio for our show is done by Eleanor Goldfield. The intro and outro music for our show is a song called Floodlight by Eleanor's former band, Rooftop Revolutionaries. Thanks for listening, and now let's go rattle thrones and topple empires.